tossed frisbees, studied on blankets spread across grass, still green despite the advancing season. The student union dominated the eastern edge of the quad, its glass facade reflecting the morning light, breakfast aromas drifting from the cafeteria within. Cormac's morning routine included precisely 15 minutes in that cafeteria, arriving early enough to avoid the main breakfast rush, selecting items quickly, finding a corner table near the windows where he could eat while reviewing lecture notes. He'd refined this routine over 3 weeks, learned the rhythms of campus life, identified the patterns that allowed him to move through his days with minimal interaction, minimal attention, minimal risk of anyone getting close enough to ask the questions he couldn't afford to answer. The cafeteria buzzed with moderate activity when he entered. Students scattered across tables in small groups, the breakfast line moving steadily. Cormac grabbed a tray, orange plastic slightly warped from years of industrial dishwashers, and moved through the line with efficient selections. 2 scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, an apple for later. The woman behind the register, Rosa, had already learned his routine, rang him up with a warm smile. He returned with a polite nod before moving toward his usual corner. The table sat beneath a window that overlooked the south lawn, provided clear sightlines to both entrances, positioned far enough from the main seating areas to discourage random joiners. Cormac had chosen it carefully that first morning, recognized its strategic value immediately, the kind of awareness that lived in his bones now, involuntary as breathing. He'd just settled into his seat when he felt the shift in energy, that subtle change in ambient noise that signaled approaching attention. 3 figures moved through the cafeteria with the casual authority of people who expected the crowd to part for them, and the crowd did, students glancing up and then away, conversations pausing mid-sentence, then resuming at lower volumes. Cormac kept his eyes on his eggs, fork moving steadily, but his peripheral vision tracked their approach with the kind of automatic threat assessment he'd promised himself he'd left behind. Brecon Aldrich led the group, 6'2" of carefully cultivated athletic build, wrapped in Roosevelt State football gear. The kind of young man who'd clearly peaked in high school and was desperately trying to maintain that peak through his undergraduate years. Sandy hair styled with too much product, strong jaw held at an angle that suggested he spent significant time practicing expressions in mirrors, grey eyes that moved constantly, cataloging reactions, measuring his effect on the space around him. His father was Maxwell Aldrich, Ohio State Senator, a fact that Brecon worked into conversations with remarkable frequency. Behind him followed his regular companions, Cade Brennan, shorter and stockier, offensive lineman build running slightly to fat, with a mean streak that manifested in casual cruelty he tried to disguise as humor, and Trent Vossler, all angles and nervous energy, the kind of follower who laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, desperate to maintain his position in the hierarchy through enthusiastic agreement with whatever Brecon decided was worth their attention. They'd noticed Cormac during his second week at Roosevelt State. He wasn't entirely sure what had triggered their interest. Maybe his careful isolation, maybe the fact that he was new and therefore undefined in the campus social structure, maybe just the random malice of bored young men looking for entertainment. The first interaction had been minor, Brecon making a comment about Cormac's worn backpack as they passed in the quad, something about Goodwill shopping, loud enough for surrounding students to hear, generating the desired laughter. Cormac had kept walking, hadn't responded, filed it away as the kind of casual meanness that lived in any large institution, hoped it would be the end of it, should have known better. Predators could smell indifference, and worse, they could smell deliberate avoidance, recognized it as a sign of something worth pursuing. The encounters had escalated with methodical predictability. Wednesday of week 2, Cade had accidentally shouldered into Cormac hard enough to send his books scattering across the hallway outside the engineering building. Casual apologies that weren't apologies, other students stepping carefully around the scattered papers while Cormac crouched to gather them, face burning, hands steady through force of will Thursday, finding his backpack moved from where he'd left it outside the library bathroom, discovering it in a trash can. Nothing stolen but the message, "Clear Friday." Trent commenting loudly about community college transfers as Cormac entered their shared structural mechanics lecture, generating snickers from nearby students who wouldn't have given Cormac a second thought but were happy to join in once someone else established him as an acceptable target. Week 3 had brought the pattern into sharper focus. Monday morning, entering the cafeteria to find Brecken already occupying Cormac's usual corner table, feet propped on the chair opposite, making deliberate eye contact as Cormac paused in the doorway. The message clear. Your routine means nothing. Your space isn't yours. I can take anything I want. Cormac had selected a different table without comment, eaten quickly, left Tuesday, walking to his afternoon physics lecture when Cade appeared beside him, matching his pace, commentary flowing like sewage. "Where you from, Sullivan? That's your real name? You hiding from something? Got that look about you like a kicked dog trying to find a corner." Cormac had maintained his silence, kept walking, arrived at his lecture with tension coiled in his shoulders like steel cable. Now, Monday morning of week 4, they were approaching his table with clear intent, and Cormac felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the involuntary calculations his body performed despite his conscious wishes. 3 opponents, positions mapped automatically, Brecken front center, Cade flanking right, Trent left rear, exits catalogued, main entrance 15 feet, kitchen service door 20 feet, emergency exit on south wall 30 feet, potential weapons if needed, his tray, the coffee mug, the plastic chair, his own body. He forced the thoughts down, focused on his eggs, kept his breathing even. This was why he'd come to Roosevelt State, to escape this kind of thinking, to be someone else, to honor the promise he'd made over his grandfather's hospital bed 2 years ago, never again, no matter what. Walk away. Always walk away. "Morning, Sullivan." Brecken's voice carried that particular quality of performative friendliness that preceded cruelty, loud enough to draw attention from surrounding tables. "Looks like you're in my spot again." Cormac kept his eyes on his plate, took another bite of eggs, chewed methodically. Around them, conversations had quieted, attention shifting their direction. He could feel the weight of observation, students watching to see how this would play out, whether he'd respond, whether this would provide entertainment worth pausing their own mornings. "I'm talking to you." Brecken's hand shot out, palms slamming down on the table hard enough to make Cormac's coffee slosh in its mug, sending ripples across the dark surface. "Think maybe you didn't hear me." "I heard you." Cormac kept his voice level, neutral, non-confrontational, just finishing breakfast. "I'll be out of your way in a minute." Minute might be too long. Cade circled around to Cormac's right, positioning himself between Cormac and the main exit. "See, Brecken likes his morning coffee at this table. Got a specific routine. You're disrupting that routine." Trent giggled, high and nervous. "Yeah, disrupting. That's not cool, transfer boy." Cormac set down his fork with deliberate care, hands visible on the table, body language projecting complete non-threat. Every instinct screamed at him to adjust his position, turn to face the multiple angles of approach, create space to move, but he forced himself to remain still. "Like I said, I'll be done in a minute. Plenty of other tables available." "But I want this one." Brecken leaned down, hands braced on the table, bringing his face close to Cormac's, breath smelling of energy drinks and morning protein shake. Question is, are you going to make this difficult? Or are you going to recognize how things work around here? The moment stretched, tension building like pressure behind a dam. Cormac met Brecken's eyes for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to show he wasn't completely cowed, short enough to avoid it reading as challenge, then looked away, reaching for his tray. No problem, table's yours. Monitors beeping their steady countdown to goodbye. Remembered the promise extracted in those final hours, the old man's hand, still strong despite everything, roughened by decades in the ring, gripping Cormac's wrist with desperate intensity. Promise me, boy. Promise me you'll walk away. What you can do, what I taught you, that's for defense only. For when there's absolutely no other choice, you understand. Don't end up like me. Don't let it consume your whole life. Be more than that. Promise me. I promise, Papa. Say it again, mean it. I promise no matter what, I'll walk away. Cormac stepped back, creating space, moving laterally toward a different gap. Just want to return my tray and get to class. Brecken made a show of checking his phone. Class doesn't start for 40 minutes, Sullivan. You got time. He moved to block the new angle, and now all 3 of them had positioned themselves in a loose triangle around Cormac, backs to the rest of the cafeteria, creating a pocket of space that felt suddenly smaller, more isolated, despite the crowd 20 feet away. Actually, I've got some questions. See, I've been asking around about you. Transfer student, community college, no social media presence I can find, no high school listed on your records, nothing on your registration about where you're from originally. That's weird, don't you think? Kind of suspicious. Makes a person wonder what you're hiding. Not hiding anything. Cormac's hands tightened fractionally on the tray. Just private. Private. Brecken rolled the word around like he was tasting it. Or running from something. My dad's a state senator, you know. Got connections everywhere. I could make some calls, find out exactly who you are, where you came from, what you did that made you want to disappear into our nice little university. The threat hung in the air, and Cormac felt the familiar cold weight settle in his stomach. This was how it started, always. The probing for weakness, the search for leverage, the systematic dismantling of whatever small piece you'd managed to construct. He'd seen it in gyms and training halls, watched bullies work, understood the psychology. They needed compliance, needed submission, needed to establish dominance not just physically, but psychologically, to break down your resistance until you accepted your role in their hierarchy. The only reliable way to stop it was to show them the cost would be too high, to demonstrate you weren't worth the effort. But that required exactly the kind of response he'd sworn he'd never give again. Nothing to find, Cormac said quietly. Now please let me through. Please. Trent mimicked Cormac's tone, voice dripping false sweetness. So polite, so non-threatening. I think he's scared, Breck. Maybe. Brecken tilted his head, studying Cormac with the focused attention of a cat watching a mouse, looking for the flinch, the break, the moment of absolute defeat. Or maybe he's just smart, knows how things work, knows his place. Cormac's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he kept his expression neutral, refused to give them the reaction they wanted around them. The cafeteria continued its normal rhythms, students eating and talking, most deliberately not watching this interaction, maintaining the polite fiction of privacy that allowed cruelty to flourish in plain sight. A few looked uncomfortable, sympathetic even, but no one moved to intervene, no one called out, no one challenged the scene playing out in their peripheral vision. This was the social contract of institutional life. Mind your business, don't get involved, protect yourself first. Finally, Brecken stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, sweeping his arm in a mocking bow. Go ahead, Sullivan, get to class. Wouldn't want you to be late. Cormac moved past them without hurrying, maintaining steady pace despite the adrenaline screaming at him to run. He could feel their eyes, tracking his movement, heard Cade's stage whisper, "Real tough guy, that one," and the resultant laughter. He returned his tray, scraped his barely touched breakfast into the trash, placed his dishes in the appropriate bins, moved through the automatic motions while his heart rate slowly descended from its spike. By the time he exited into the quad, the morning sunshine felt like a reprieve. Cool air against his flushed face. The next morning arrived with the first real bite of October cold. The logical progression of equations that always produced consistent results if you followed the proper methodology. There was peace in this, clarity in problems that had definable solutions, comfort in the structured thinking that civil engineering demanded. The lecture passed without incident, and Cormac felt some of the morning's tension ease. Maybe yesterday's confrontation had satisfied something in Brecon, established whatever hierarchy he needed to establish, allowed everyone to move forward with minimal continued interaction. Maybe he'd bought himself some breathing room through strategic submission, sacrificed pride for peace. Maybe this would be manageable. He should have known better. The campus library sprawled across 3 floors at the eastern edge of the quad. Modern architecture grafted onto original 1960s bones. Glass and steel additions creating reading nooks and study spaces that caught natural light throughout the day. Cormac spent his Tuesday afternoon there, settled into a carrel on the 2nd floor with his dynamics textbook and problem sets, working methodically through calculations, finding the familiar rhythm of problem-solving soothing after the morning's stress. Other students moved through the stacks around him, whispered conversations, the rustle of pages, keyboards clicking, the ambient sound of concentrated study. He'd been there perhaps 2 hours when he felt eyes on him, that prickle of attention that raised the hairs on his neck. He looked up to find Trent Vossler 2 aisles away, phone in hand, angled in Cormac's direction. The moment their eyes met, Trent grinned and lifted the phone higher, making the recording obvious deliberate. Cormac looked back down at his textbook, tried to focus on the equations swimming before his eyes, but his concentration shattered like dropped glass. After a moment, he heard footsteps retreating, Trent's quiet laughter echoing off the high ceilings. That evening, Cormac's phone buzzed with a notification Instagram. He didn't use social media actively, maintained minimal presence out of practical necessity rather than genuine interest, followed no one, posted nothing. But the tag notification drew him to Brecon's account, public and populated with the typical college athlete mix of gym selfies, party photos, and performative campus life documentation. The new post showed a photo of Cormac hunched over his textbook in the library, caption reading, "When you're so boring, even the books look like they'd rather be somewhere else." Transferred, just not fitting in, to Roosevelt State U. The comments beneath ranged from cruel to merely dismissive. Students Cormac had never spoken to weighing in with jokes about his appearance, his solitude, his apparent lack of social skills. He stared at his phone screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over the delete notification button. This was the modern evolution of bullying, he understood, the weaponization of visibility, the transformation of private suffering into public entertainment. In previous generations, cruelty happened in person, witnessed by limited audiences, memories fading with time. Now it persisted, crystallized in digital form, accessible to anyone with internet connection, permanently archived in servers somewhere, impossible to escape or erase. The humiliation multiplied exponentially, the mockery crowdsourced, the isolation compounded by watching people you'd never met decide you were acceptable to ridicule based on a single decontextualized image. He deleted the notification, set his phone face down on his desk, returned to his problem sets. But the equations refused to cohere. His mind spinning out into the various implications of that post, wondering how many students had seen it, how many were laughing, how this would change his campus experience tomorrow. Would people recognize him, point him out? Would that photo become how he was defined at Roosevelt State, his identity reduced to a punchline in Breckin Aldrich's social media performance? Wednesday morning confirmed his fears. Walking across the quad, he felt the subtle shifts in attention, the glances and whispers, students nudging each other and looking his direction. Not everyone, not even most, but enough to make his skin crawl with awareness, to make every step feel observed and judged. In his morning lecture, he caught two students a few rows ahead, glancing back at him while one scrolled through their phone. Heads together, quiet laughter. In the student union, grabbing lunch, the woman at the register gave him a sympathetic smile that felt worse than mockery. Pity confirming that yes, everyone knew, everyone had seen, everyone understood he was the designated victim this semester. He ate quickly at a small table near the vending machines, no longer even attempting his previous corner spot, and was gathering his trash when Cade dropped into the seat across from him without invitation. "Hey, Sullivan, saw Breckin's post about you. Pretty funny, right? You don't mind, do you? Just guys being guys, having some fun." Cormac stood, tray in hand. "Need to get to class. Sit down for a minute." Cade's voice carried a harder edge now, the friendly facade wearing thin. "I'm talking to you, and I said I need to get to class." Cormac moved toward the trash and dish return, but Cade stood, followed, maintaining uncomfortably close proximity. "See, that's disrespectful, Sullivan. Walking away when someone's trying to have a conversation makes it seem like you think you're better than me. Are you better than me?" Cormac dumped his trash, placed his tray on the return conveyor, turned to face Cade directly for the first time. "No. Just trying to mind my own business and get through my day. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me do that." "What you'd appreciate?" Cade's laugh was sharp, humorless. "That's rich. Let me tell you what I appreciate. Respect. My friend Breckin, he appreciates respect too. And when transfer students show up acting all mysterious and standoffish, not engaging with the community, that reads as disrespectful. You understand?" Other students were watching now, the confrontation drawing attention. People slowing their exit from the union to observe Cormac felt the familiar compression of options, the narrowing of acceptable responses. Capitulate or escalate, submit or resist, accept the role assigned to you or fight your way out of it. The mathematics of dominance hierarchies, the social dynamics of pack behavior, all the patterns he'd studied and understood and learned to navigate through careful application of controlled violence back when that was his world, his identity, his entire understanding of how to exist among other people. "I understand," Cormac said quietly. "And I'm showing respect right now by walking away instead of making this into something it doesn't need to be." He moved around Cade, heading for the exit, and made it 3 steps before he felt hands shove hard into his back, sending him stumbling forward into another student, a girl with long black hair who yelped in surprise as Cormac crashed into her, both of them nearly falling. He caught his balance, turned, found Cade grinning at him with hands spread in mock innocence. "Whoops, guess you tripped clumsy today, huh, Sullivan?" The girl he'd collided with shot him an annoyed look, clearly uncomfortable being drawn into this. Seen, and hurried away without comment. Cormac straightened, adjusted his backpack, looked at Cade, and then passed him to where Brecken had appeared in the Union entrance, leaning against the doorframe with casual interest, observing his lieutenant's performance. Their eyes met for a moment, and Cormac saw the calculation there, the assessment, the predator testing prey for weakness. He looked away first, hated himself for it, and headed toward the north exit, while laughter followed him into the cold October air. That afternoon, walking from the library toward his evening physics lecture, Cormac took his usual route past the athletic complex, cutting through the practice field where the football team was running drills in full pads, autumn light slanting long across the grass. He kept his eyes forward, path angled well clear of the field, but heard the whistle blow and coach's voice calling break, and moments later heard his name called out, "Yo, Sullivan, transfer boy!" He kept walking, pace steady, refusing the bait. "Hey!" Louder now, definitely Brecken's voice, followed by Cade and Trent's laughter. "I know you hear me, you deaf or just rude." Cormac continued toward Harrington Hall, now 50 feet ahead, sanctuary in sight. His mind calculated automatically 30 seconds to reach the door, 10 seconds through the entrance and into the populated hallway, merge with the pre-class crowd and become effectively untouchable. 30 seconds, he could manage 30 seconds. Footsteps pounded behind him, multiple runners, and then Brecken was in front of him, having circled around at a sprint, now blocking the path in full football gear. Pads making him look even larger, helmet under one arm, face flushed from practice. Cade and Trent flanked him seconds later, also in practice gear, and Cormac found himself triangulated again, this time on an open sidewalk with other students passing by, witnesses to whatever came next. "When I call you, you stop," Brecken said, breathing slightly elevated from the sprint, but voice steady, controlled. "That's basic respect, Sullivan, basic social contract. You're really struggling with this concept." "Was heading to class," Cormac replied, keeping his voice even. "Didn't want to interrupt your practice." "How considerate." Brecken stepped closer, using his height and bulk to maximum psychological effect, forcing Cormac to either hold his ground and accept the crowded personal space or retreat and demonstrate submission. "But see, I wanted to talk to you about something, about your vibe. You give off this vibe like you're too good for Roosevelt State, too good for friendly conversation, too good for engaging with your peers. And I'm wondering, where does that come from? What makes a community college transfer with no friends and no life think he can act superior?" "I don't think I'm superior." Cormac's hands tightened on his backpack straps, "just trying to focus on my studies and not cause problems." "Not cause problems." Brecken repeated it thoughtfully, as if considering a novel philosophical concept. "But you are causing problems, Sullivan. Your whole attitude is a problem. Your refusal to be social is a problem. The fact that you skulk around campus like some kind of creeper, never talking to anyone, always alone, that makes people uncomfortable. That's a problem." Trent giggled his nervous giggle. "Yeah, super creepy, like serial killer vibes." "I'm not bothering anyone," Cormac said, and hated how defensive it sounded, how close to pleading. "I come to class, I do my work, I leave. That's not hurting you." "It bothers me when someone acts like they're above basic human interaction." Brecken reached out and flicked the strap of Cormac's backpack, casual gesture that somehow carried menace. "It bothers me when someone transfers to my school and acts like they're too damaged or too mysterious to participate in the community. So I'm giving you some advice, transfer boy. Adjust your attitude. Be friendlier. Smile more. Stop acting like every conversation is an interrogation. Can you do that?" 20 feet away, a group of students had slowed their walk, watching this interaction with varying expressions of discomfort and interest. None intervened, none called out, none challenged what was happening. Cormac met Brecken's eyes, held them longer than he probably should have, and saw the flicker of response there, pleasure at getting a reaction, hating more the relief he felt when the evasions succeeded. His apartment became his refuge, those hours between classes spent increasingly in isolation, venturing onto campus only for lectures and essential library time. The rest of his existence compressed into the small, safe space of his rented bedroom, where nobody could find him, mock him, photograph him, turn his private misery into public entertainment. He'd developed insomnia, lying awake, replaying confrontations, analyzing his responses, hating his submission, but unable to see alternatives that didn't lead to exactly the outcomes his grandfather had made him promise to avoid. His coursework suffered, concentration fragmenting under the constant low-level stress, equations taking twice as long to solve, reading comprehension evaporating mid-paragraph as his mind spun out into anxious speculation about tomorrow's inevitable encounters. He'd lost weight, appetite diminished, meals becoming purely functional fuel consumption rather than anything approaching enjoyment. The mirror showed the physical manifestation of sustained psychological pressure, dark circles under his eyes, jaw perpetually tight, shoulders carrying tension even in supposed relaxation. On Wednesday of that week, he entered the cafeteria for lunch to find his backpack waiting for him on an otherwise empty table, the one he'd initially claimed weeks ago, before Brecken had established it as contested territory. The backpack sat upright in the center of the table, and even from across the room, Cormac could see something was wrong with it, something about its shape and positioning that triggered immediate wariness. He approached slowly, aware of eyes watching, aware this was staged for maximum observation. Someone had emptied a container of chocolate milk into his backpack. The thick brown liquid had soaked through his notebooks, textbooks, laptop case, everything saturated and ruined. The smell rose in a sweet, sickly wave. Around him, students had stopped eating to watch his reaction, phones already out, capturing this moment for whatever social media documentation would follow. Brecken sat 3 tables away with Cade and Trent, all 3 of them watching with undisguised interest, waiting to see how the designated victim would handle this escalation. Cormac stood over his destroyed backpack for a long moment, options cycling through his mind with mechanical precision. Make a scene, challenge Brecken publicly, force administration involvement, turn this into official incident requiring investigation and consequences. Likely outcome: minimal punishment for Brecken given his father's influence, escalated hostility afterward, reputation as troublemaker who can't handle campus social dynamics. Walk away, leave the backpack, leave the cafeteria, abandon hundreds of dollars worth of ruined materials, accept total defeat. Likely outcome: immediate relief. Long-term escalation as submission invites further cruelty. Clean up, deal with the mess, salvage what he could, refuse to show the distress they wanted. Likely outcome: provides entertainment, changes nothing, postpones rather than prevents next incident. He chose the third option because the other 2 felt impossible. Moving deliberately, refusing to hurry or show panic, he lifted his dripping backpack and carried it to the nearest trash can, setting it carefully on top. Students watched in silence as he returned to the table, used napkins from the dispenser to wipe up the puddle of chocolate milk pooling on the surface. Methodical and thorough, performing this small janitorial service while his face burned and his stomach churned and some distant part of his consciousness screamed at him to stop accepting this, to fight back, to show them what he actually was underneath the careful camouflage of harmlessness. But his grandfather's voice echoed louder. "Promise me, boy, walk away, be more than violence." and Cormac finished cleaning, threw away the soaked napkins, left the cafeteria without eating lunch, without looking at Brecken's table, without giving them the satisfaction of visible reaction beyond what they could infer from his silence and his methodical cleanup and his absolute unwillingness to challenge or confront or resist. In his apartment that evening, he spread out his ruined materials on his desk. The textbooks were salvageable if swollen and stained, pages separating carefully left to dry. His notebooks, 3 full ones containing a semester's worth of lecture notes, were total losses. Ink bled into illegibility, pages adhering to each other in sodden clumps. His laptop had survived intact inside its protective case. Small mercy. The backpack itself sat in his bathtub, water running through it, chocolate milk gradually rinsing away, but even after cleaning it would smell faintly sweet and spoiled, ruined for practical use. He sat on his bed, head in his hands, and felt the familiar weight settling over him. This was how it worked, he understood with the clarity of someone who'd lived through variations of this pattern before, in different contexts, different institutions, different hierarchies. The systematic erosion of dignity, the public humiliations designed to isolate you from potential allies, the escalating cruelties testing your breaking point, searching for the moment you'd either submit completely or snap spectacularly, either outcome providing satisfaction to the tormentors. He'd been here before, years ago, in a different life, back when his response had been different, when his grandfather's training had been his primary tool for navigating conflict, back when he'd been someone else entirely. The memories rose unbidden, uncomfortable, unwelcome, 15 years old, already training in the small boxing gym his grandfather owned in Detroit, already showing the kind of natural aptitude that drew attention from circuit, started talking trash about a fight Cormac had won the previous month, claiming it was fixed or lucky or undeserved. Escalation followed the familiar pattern, words to shoving to thrown punches, and Cormac had responded with automatic precision, years of training flowing through him without conscious thought, defending himself with efficiency that looked like aggression, 3 opponents on the ground in under 30 seconds, and then in the aftermath, flashing lights and sirens and police report and the hospital stay for one of them, the one who'd hit his head on the curb when Cormac's inside leg kick swept his base, 3 weeks in the ICU. Emergency surgery, permanent cognitive impairment, family-threatening lawsuits, criminal charges, civil judgments. Cormac's grandfather pulling strings, calling in favors, leveraging every connection from his boxing days to keep Cormac out of jail, to frame it as clear self-defense, to negotiate settlements and agreements and NDAs that drained the old man's savings but preserved Cormac's freedom. And then, in the hospital himself a month later, heart attack brought on by stress and age, and the financial devastation of protecting his grandson, Papa Sullivan had extracted the promise that now governed Cormac's life. No more fighting, boy. I mean it. What you did, that was self-defense, and you had every right. But look at the consequences. Look at the cost. That kid's life is changed forever. With his fists. But the promise demanded a price, he was learning, demanded submission to cruelty, acceptance of victimhood, the systematic erosion of dignity in service of avoiding the alternative. And sitting in his apartment with his ruined materials, the smell of chocolate milk still clinging to his clothes, the weight of constant vigilance pressing down on his shoulders, Cormac wondered for the first time whether the promise was sustainable. Whether there was a breaking point beyond which walking away became impossible, not because of choice, but because the damage of continued submission exceeded the damage of fighting back. He shook off the thought, stood, retrieved a fresh notebook from his desk drawer, one of three he kept as backup, learned caution from previous life experiences, and began the laborious process of reconstructing his lecture notes from memory and textbook references. This was manageable. This was survivable. This was temporary. Brecken would eventually get bored, find a new target, graduate, and move on with his life. Cormac just had to endure, maintain his promise, keep his head down, survive until graduation 18 months from now. He could do that. He'd survived worse. The following Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Cormac sat in the library's third-floor study room, a small glass-walled space he'd reserved through the online system, door closed against the ambient noise of the main reading area. His laptop was open to a structures problem set, equations flowing across the screen. And for the first time in weeks, he'd achieved something approaching genuine concentration. The mathematics pulling him into that productive flow state where time became elastic and problems resolved themselves through systematic application of learned principles. Outside his study room, other students moved through the stacks, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the high windows, casting long shadows across the industrial carpet. He heard the commotion before he saw it, raised voices, the distinctive sound of books falling, a crash that reverberated through the third floor's usual studious quiet. Cormac looked up from his laptop through the glass wall of his study room and saw a cluster of students gathering near the central stairwell, phones emerging, that telltale shift in body language that signified something was happening, some disruption of normal routine worth documenting. He watched for a moment, curious despite himself, then returned to his problem set. Not his business, not his drama. Stay focused, stay invisible, stay uninvolved. But the voices grew louder, and he caught fragments now. Leave her alone. Think you're tough. Just apologize. And something in the tone, the desperate edge of fear meeting stubborn defiance, pulled at his attention. He saved his work, stood, moved to his study room door and cracked it open to better hear what was happening 20 feet away in the stacks. A girl stood with her back against a bookshelf, textbooks scattered at her feet where they'd fallen or been knocked, face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. She was maybe 5'4", athletic build, wearing Roosevelt State track team sweats, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, amber eyes bright with unshed tears. She was clearly fighting not to let fall. In front of her, blocking her exit from the aisle, Trent Vossler loomed with two other football players Cormac didn't recognize by name, all three of them crowding her space with casual menace. "I said I'm sorry your delicate feelings got hurt," Trent was saying, voice dripping false sincerity. "But when you run into me in the hallway and spill my coffee all over my shirt, you don't get to act like I'm the bad guy for calling you clumsy. That's just facts." "You stepped into my path deliberately," the girl shot back, voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I saw you move to block me, and it was your choice to throw the rest of your coffee at my backpack. So no, I'm not apologizing for your own behavior." One of the other football players, tall, dark-skinned, heavy build, laughed sharply. "Got some mouth on you for someone who's 5'0". Maybe you need a lesson in respect." "Maybe you need a lesson in not being garbage humans," she replied, and Cormac felt a jolt of alarm at her tone, the kind of defiant bravery that came from either complete naivety about real danger or absolute refusal to be intimidated regardless of consequences. He'd seen that tone before, in fighters who couldn't be broken, and it always either led to victory or to serious injury, depending on the skill backing up the courage. Garbage humans. Trent stepped closer, forcing her to press back harder against the bookshelf. "That's definitely not an apology. That's escalation. Now you've got me wondering what we should do about someone who insults us." refuses to show basic respect, and then tries to act tough when confronted with her own bad behavior. The girl's hands clenched into fists at her sides, and Cormac saw her body language shift fractionally, weight moving to the balls of her feet, preparing for fight or flight, calculating whether she could slip past them or would need to make this physical. The gathered students watched with that familiar mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity, no one stepping forward to intervene, no one willing to make themselves a target by challenging the established social order, and Cormac felt something shift in his chest, some line being crossed that he hadn't known existed until this moment. This wasn't about him. This wasn't his fight, his drama, his responsibility. He could close his study room door, return to his problem sets, maintain his policy of non-involvement, honor his promise to his grandfather by staying out of conflicts that didn't directly threaten him. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. Attention shifting, dynamics rearranging themselves around this new factor. Trent's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been excitement at this unexpected opportunity. The girl looked at Cormac with confused relief, clearly uncertain who he was or why he was intervening, but grateful for the disruption. The gathered students whispered amongst themselves, phones still recording, documenting this development in whatever ongoing social media narrative they were constructing. "Well, well," Trent said slowly, turning to face Cormac fully, other two football players adjusting their positions to create a new triangle. "If it isn't transfer boy Sullivan, didn't know you had it in you to get involved in other people's business, thought you preferred skulking around avoiding everyone. I'm saying she's leaving, and you're letting her leave. That's not business. That's just basic decency." Cormac held his position in the aisle, not advancing but not retreating, body language neutral but something in his eyes, some quality of absolute stillness, of complete readiness, that made Trent hesitate fractionally before covering it with bravado. "And if we decide she's not leaving until she apologizes, what then? You going to make us let her go? You?" Trent laughed, gestured to his companions. "Three of us, one of you, and you're what? 5'10", maybe 160, soaking wet. The math doesn't favor you, transfer boy." "The math's fine," Cormac said quietly. "Let her leave." The moment stretched. Tension building, everyone in the library's third floor holding their breath, waiting to see if this would escalate beyond words into action. Cormac felt his awareness expand and sharpen, that old combat consciousness flowing through him like cold water, every detail suddenly vivid and precise. Trent's weight distribution on his heels, the second player's injured left shoulder evident in how he held it, the third player's nervous fidgeting suggesting he was the least committed to actual confrontation. Exit routes mapped automatically, improvised weapons catalogued, strike zones identified. The choreography of potential violence playing out in his mind's eye with mechanical precision, and underneath it all, his grandfather's voice. "Promise me, boy, walk away." But he couldn't walk away from this, he realized. Couldn't leave this girl to whatever humiliation or harm Trent's casual cruelty might escalate into. Couldn't retreat back into his protective isolation, knowing he'd chosen comfort over doing what was right. Some lines, once you saw them being crossed, demanded response regardless of personal cost. Some promises he was learning came into conflict with other obligations, to yourself, to others, to some basic human requirement of standing against cruelty when you had the ability to do so. "Final chance," Cormac said, and his voice carried a different quality now. Trent looked between Brecken and Cormac, clearly frustrated at being called off, but the hierarchy held. He stepped aside with theatrical reluctance, sweeping his arm in mocking invitation. "Fine, she can go. For now." The girl didn't hesitate, didn't try to deliver a parting shot or reclaim pride through words. She scooped up her scattered textbooks, moved past Trent and his companions with careful space, and headed for the stairwell with quick, purposeful strides. As she passed Cormac, their eyes met for a brief moment, and he saw gratitude there, confusion, questions, but she kept moving, understanding intuitively that lingering would restart whatever momentum had built up. She disappeared down the stairs, footsteps fading, and the tension eased slightly, confrontation averted, if not resolved. Brecken moved closer to Cormac, studying him with new interest. "That was unexpected, Sullivan. Didn't realize you had it in you to play hero. Thought you preferred keeping your head down, staying out of other people's drama." "Wasn't playing anything," Cormac replied evenly. "Just seemed like she needed someone to intervene." Intervene. Brecken tasted the word, smile playing around his lips. Interesting choice. Intervene suggests you thought you could actually do something if it came to that. What exactly did you think you were going to do, transfer boy? Fight 3 football players? You wasn't looking for a fight, was just making sure she could leave. "Indeed, but you were ready for one." It wasn't a question, and Brecken's eyes had sharpened with focused attention now, picking up on details, processing information. "I saw how you were standing. How you're standing now, actually. That's not scared. That's not submissive. That's something else. So I'm wondering, who are you really, Sullivan? Because the guy who's been letting us push him around for weeks, letting Cade dump his textbooks, letting Trent photograph him in the library, letting me pour chocolate milk in his backpack, that guy disappears in the cafeteria with his head down and his shoulders hunched. But this guy," he gestured at Cormac's current posture, the subtle differences in body language. Cormac hadn't even realized he'd shifted into, "This guy looks like he could be a problem. So which is real?" The question hung between them, and Cormac felt the weight of it, the implications spreading outward like cracks in ice. He'd revealed something, broken his own careful camouflage, given Brecken information that would change their dynamic going forward. No going back to invisibility now, no retreating into the protective fiction of helplessness. The mask had slipped, and predators didn't ignore signs of hidden strength. They probed them, tested them, tried to determine if the prey was actually more dangerous than it appeared, or if the brief flash of capability was illusion, bluff, temporary aberration that could be crushed back into submission with sufficient pressure. "The real me is someone who wants to finish his degree and not cause problems," Cormac said carefully. "But I'm also someone who can't watch 3 guys corner a girl half their size and just walk away. If that makes things complicated between us, I'm sorry. Wasn't trying to challenge you, just couldn't not do something." "Couldn't not do something," Brecken repeated and laughed, the sound without real humor. "Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting, Sullivan." He glanced at Cade, some unspoken communication passing between them, then back to Cormac. "We'll see you round, transfer boy, real soon. And next time you feel like you can't not do something, maybe think about the consequences first, for everyone involved." They left, Trent and his companions following, the cluster of students gradually dispersing back to their studies. Drama concluded, everyone already composing social media posts and text messages documenting what they'd witnessed. Cormac stood alone in the now quiet aisle for a long moment, adrenaline slowly draining, awareness of what he'd just done settling over him like cold water. He'd crossed a line, broken his pattern of avoidance, demonstrated capability he'd worked for weeks to keep hidden. And Brecken had noticed, had catalogued it, would be reassessing his approach, calculating new strategies, preparing escalations designed to test whether Cormac's intervention was anomaly or warning. He returned to his study room, sat at his laptop, stared at the structures problem set still waiting on his screen. The equations looked like abstract symbols now, meaningless patterns, his concentration shattered beyond recovery. Outside the glass walls, library life continued its normal rhythms, students studying and researching and collaborating, the brief disruption already fading into background noise and eventual forgetting for most of them. But for Cormac, everything had changed. He'd made a choice, broken his promise of total non-engagement, allowed himself to care about someone else's suffering enough to risk his own carefully constructed safety. And now consequences would follow, as inevitable as gravity, as predictable as structural failure under excessive load. He'd bought that girl her freedom to leave the library, but he suspected he'd paid for it with his own, whatever fragile peace he'd maintained through strategic submission now forfeit, the storm he'd been trying to avoid, finally breaking overhead. His phone buzzed, text message from unknown number. "Thanks for that. Seriously, I'm Marlowe, by the way. Track team. If you ever need someone to buy you coffee or something, let me know." Cormac stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Cormac, engineering, and you're welcome. Be careful around those guys. I know, they're the worst. But hey, you were pretty brave standing up to them like that. Most people just watch." "Yeah, I know." October deepening into November, frost on the grass, breath steaming in the early light. Cormac reached the student union at 7:25, found Marlowe already waiting outside the entrance, same athletic sweats as Thursday, track team jacket added against the cold, hands wrapped around a coffee cup from the on-campus Starbucks. She smiled when she saw him, genuine warmth without the careful calculation he'd grown accustomed to reading in every social interaction. "Hey, you came. Said I would." They moved into the union together, through the morning trickle of early risers, into the cafeteria where breakfast service had just begun. The space felt different at this hour, quieter, almost peaceful. The usual crowds and drama not yet activated. They moved through the line together, Marlowe loading her tray with scrambled eggs and hash browns and fruit, Cormac sticking to his usual minimalist selections, and found a table near the windows, away from the few other occupied seats. "So," Marlowe said, attacking her breakfast with the focused intensity of someone who burned significant calories training, "engineering major, hates bullies, apparently has some kind of background that makes 3 football players back down. You're kind of a mystery, Cormac Sullivan." "Not really, just someone trying to get through college without drama." He sipped his coffee, felt the caffeine start to uncoil some of the tension in his shoulders. "Yeah, well, that's going to be harder now. The way you stood, the way you talked to them, that wasn't just bravery or stupidity, that was confidence based on something real. You've trained, haven't you? Some kind of fighting background?" Cormac's hands tightened fractionally on his coffee mug. "Why do you ask?" "Because I do martial arts. Have since I was 8. Part of growing up in a rough neighborhood in Cleveland. Taekwondo mostly, though I dabbled in some boxing. And I recognize that energy. That way of existing in your body, like you know exactly what it can do if necessary. You've got it. So I'm wondering, why hide it? Why let Brecken and his crew push you around for weeks if you could put them on their asses with minimal effort?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything, and Cormac found himself suddenly near the edge of honesty he'd carefully avoided for 2 years. "Because putting people on their asses has consequences. And I made a promise to someone important to me that I'd avoid those consequences, even if it meant taking some hits to my pride." "That's very noble." Marlowe studied him thoughtfully. "Also, maybe not sustainable. There's a difference between choosing not to fight and being incapable of defending yourself. The first is strength, the second is just being a victim. And Brecken, he doesn't respect either one. He respects power and dominance. That's it." "I know what he respects." Cormac met her eyes. "But if I start down that path, where does it stop? When do I become just another guy using violence to solve problems? Enforcing my own hierarchy? That's not who I want to be. There's also a middle ground. You don't have to go around fighting everyone, but you also don't have to accept systematic abuse. Standing your ground isn't the same as starting fights. Defending yourself and others isn't the same as being a bully. She leaned back, considering. Look, I don't know your story, and you don't have to tell me. But I saw something shift in you Thursday, some decision being made, and my read is that you're at a crossroads. You can keep trying to hide and hope Brecken gets bored, or you can accept that he's not going to get bored and that eventually you're going to have to make a stand. Better to do it on your terms than his. Before Cormac could respond, movement near the cafeteria entrance drew his attention. Brecken, Cade, and Trent had entered together, earlier than their usual schedule, scanning the room with deliberate purpose. Their eyes found Cormac and Marlowe's table almost immediately, and Brecken's face split into a smile that carried no warmth whatsoever. "And there's your answer," Marlowe muttered. "They're here for you. For us now, since you're sitting with me. You ready for this?" "No." Cormac set down his coffee mug, felt his body automatically shifting into the positioning he'd been trying to avoid. Weight balanced, muscles loose, awareness expanding. But I guess that doesn't matter anymore. They approached with the lazy confidence of predators who knew they owned this territory, commandeered the two empty chairs at Cormac and Marlowe's table without invitation, settling in with casual disregard for the clearly private conversation they were interrupting. Brecken's eyes moved between them, assessing, calculating, smile widening. Well, he said slowly. "Look at this. Transfer boy Sullivan found himself a girlfriend. That's sweet. That's really sweet, isn't it, boys?" "Real sweet," Cade agreed, though questionable judgment on her part. "I mean, Sullivan? Really? Setting the bar pretty low there." Marlowe's expression hardened. "We're having a private conversation. Why don't you find your own table?" "Why don't you watch your tone?" Trent shot back. "You already got yourself in trouble once this week. Want to try for a repeat?" "She's fine," Brecken said, waving off Trent's comment, focus remaining on Cormac. "I'm not here to hassle your new friend, Sullivan. I'm here to give you an opportunity. See, after Thursday's little performance in the library, I started thinking. Started wondering who you really are under all that careful submission. And I decided we should settle this question definitively. So here's what's going to happen. Friday night, parking lot behind the athletic complex. After the sun goes down, you, me, nobody else around. We'll have a conversation with our fists, figure out once and for all whether you're actually someone worth respecting." "You're not actually going," Marlowe said quietly. "Right? You understand that's a trap, that even if you win, especially if you win, they'll use it against you, file assault charges, claim you attacked them, use Brecken's father's influence to press charges. You'd be expelled at minimum, possibly arrested." "I know." Cormac's hands lay flat on the table, motionless. "But if I don't show up, the harassment escalates and spreads to you now since they've seen us together. I've painted a target on you by association." "I can handle myself," her jaw set stubbornly, "and I'd rather deal with their bullshit than watch you walk into a situation designed to destroy you. There has to be another option." "Like what? Report them to administration? Hope the institution suddenly decides to take bullying seriously when the bully's father is a state senator? Hope that doesn't just make things worse by confirming I'm weak enough to need authority figures to protect me?" He shook his head slowly. "I've been around enough institutional hierarchies to know how this works. Either you establish yourself as not worth the effort, or you get ground down systematically until you leave. Those are the options. So you're going to fight him?" "I don't know." And he didn't, genuinely torn between the promise to his grandfather and the practical reality that walking away seemed to have stopped being available as an option the moment he'd intervened in the library. "I've got until Friday to figure it out. Maybe something changes between now and then." But he didn't believe it, and from Marlowe's expression, neither did she. They finished their breakfast in subdued quiet, exchanged phone numbers with unspoken agreement to stay in contact, went their separate ways to Monday morning classes. Cormac moved through his lectures in a fog of distraction, professors' voices washing over him without comprehension, notebooks filling with automatic transcription, while his mind cycled endlessly through scenarios and outcomes. Fight Brecken, possible victory, guaranteed consequences, betrayal of his promise, potential criminal charges, everything he'd worked to avoid for 2 years. Don't fight Brecken, confirmed coward status, escalated harassment for himself and now Marlowe, systematic erosion of any peace or dignity, slow destruction of his ability to function at Roosevelt State, no good options, no clean choices. Just damage control and triage, choosing which disaster to accept. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in similar fugue states, campus taking on a dreamlike quality of unreality. Students he'd never spoken to seemed aware of the situation, whispers following his movements across the quad. The social media apparatus, having apparently distributed news of Friday's planned confrontation campus-wide. Some looked at him with pity, already writing him off as someone stupid enough to accept Brecken's challenge. Others showed interest, anticipation of entertainment, the prospect of violence adding spice to their otherwise mundane undergraduate existence. A few, very few, nodded at him in passing, with what might have been respect or solidarity. Recognition of someone refusing to submit completely to intimidation. Marlowe texted him Tuesday evening, "Still thinking about Friday. Want to talk it through?" They met at a coffee shop off campus, neutral territory, and spent 2 hours discussing options and implications, arriving at no satisfactory conclusions, but finding comfort in the shared processing, the simple fact of having someone who understood what he was facing. She offered to be there Friday night, to document everything with her phone, to serve as witness if things went wrong. He declined, unwilling to implicate her further in whatever disaster approached, she insisted, and they compromised. She'd be nearby, but not visible. Backup if things went truly sideways. Wednesday afternoon, walking from the library toward his apartment, Cormac detoured through a park 2 blocks from campus, needed space to think, to breathe, to escape the pressure cooker atmosphere of Roosevelt State temporarily. The park was small, mostly empty on a cold weekday afternoon, playground equipment sitting unused, handful of people walking dogs or jogging along the paths. He found a bench overlooking a small pond, sat, watched the wind disturb the dark water into rippling patterns. His phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Sullivan?" Unfamiliar voice, professional, slightly formal. "This is Linda Harlow, Assistant Dean of Students at Roosevelt State. I'm calling regarding some concerns that have been brought to my attention about an incident scheduled for this Friday evening." Cormac's stomach sank. "What incident?" "Please don't be coy, Mr. Sullivan. Multiple students have reported that you and another student, Brecken Aldrich, are planning to engage in a physical altercation on university property this Friday. I'm calling to make very clear that Roosevelt State has a zero-tolerance policy for violence of any kind. If this incident occurs, both parties will face severe disciplinary consequences, potentially including expulsion. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Cormac closed his eyes, felt another layer of options peel away. "For the record, I didn't agree to anything Brecken issued a challenge. I haven't decided whether to show up. I would strongly advise not showing up, Mr. Sullivan, and I would further advise that if you feel threatened by another student, you file a formal complaint through proper channels, rather than attempting to resolve matters through violence. We have procedures for addressing harassment and bullying. With respect, ma'am, how effective have those procedures been so far? The words came out sharper than intended, frustration bleeding through his careful control. Because from my experience, and from watching what happened to another student in the library last, haven't heard from you today. Been better. Locker vandalized. Administration called to warn me about Friday, feeling pretty trapped. Want company? He did, desperately, but answered, not sure that's smart. The more you're associated with me, the more of a target you become. Stop trying to protect me from my own choices. I'm coming over. Send me your address. An hour later, she appeared at his apartment door with takeout Chinese food and a determined expression that suggested argument would be futile. They ate on his small couch, the food warming him from the inside, her presence easing some of the isolation's weight. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions, just listened when he needed to talk, sat in comfortable silence when he didn't, reminded him through simple presence that he wasn't completely alone in this. Can I tell you something? She said eventually, setting aside her empty carton. I've been at Roosevelt State for 3 years. I've watched Brecken Aldrich terrorize people for 3 years, and no one stops him. Not administration, not campus security, not other students. Everyone's too afraid of his father's connections, too worried about their own situations, too invested in believing that staying neutral keeps them safe. And you know what happens? People transfer away, people drop out, people spend their undergraduate years learning that bullies win, and systems designed to protect you actually protect power instead. So what are you saying? That I should fight him, risk everything I've worked for because systems are broken? I'm saying I don't know what you should do, but I know that Thursday in the library you made a choice to be something other than a passive witness. You stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, and maybe that's its own kind of answer. She met his eyes steadily. Your grandfather made you promise not to fight. But did he make you promise to let cruel people destroy you? To accept victimhood as permanent condition, to never stand up for yourself or others? He made me promise to walk away, to avoid violence, to solve problems with my mind instead of my fists. And you have walked away. For weeks, for months, you walked away from every provocation, every humiliation, every attack on your dignity. You've kept that promise beyond what most people could endure. But Brecken's not giving you walking away as an option anymore. He's forcing confrontation. So maybe the question isn't whether you fight, but whether you fight on his terms or yours. They talked late into the evening, circling the problem from every angle. And gradually something clarified in Cormac's mind. Tomorrow night, Brecken expected him to either appear for a private fight or publicly not appear and accept coward status. Both outcomes served Brecken's purposes. Both maintained his dominance. Both kept the existing power structure intact. But there were other possibilities, other ways to force confrontation while shifting the terms, changing the context, refusing to play by rules designed to make you lose. Marlowe left close to midnight, and Cormac spent the remaining dark hours not planning to fight. That felt too much like betraying his grandfather's memory, but planning to create a situation where Brecken's usual tactics would fail, where truth and witnesses and public accountability might actually matter. It was a long shot, probably wouldn't work, likely just lead to different flavor of disaster. But sitting still and waiting for annihilation felt impossible now, and doing nothing had clearly stopped being safe or sustainable. Friday arrived with the same cold October weather, frost persisting into late morning, students moving across campus in heavy coats, breath steaming, eager for weekend and escape from academic obligations. Cormac attended his morning classes, structural mechanics and materials science, took notes automatically, mind elsewhere. Between lectures, he made several phone calls, sent several texts, put pieces in place for whatever came next, met Marlowe for lunch in the student union, neutral public space, and briefed her on his idea. She listened with growing approval, then insisted on helping, pulled out her phone and started making her own calls, recruited her track team friends, expanded the web of coordination. "If you're doing this, you're doing it right," she said firmly. "Public documented, no ambiguity about what happened or why, and with enough witnesses that their usual intimidation won't work." By late afternoon, word had spread through the mysterious alchemy of campus gossip that something was happening that evening at the athletic complex, that the anticipated confrontation between Brecon Aldrich and the weird transfer student who'd been getting bullied all semester was coming to a head. The social media chatter reached fever pitch, students making plans to be nearby, to watch, to document, treating it like entertainment rather than someone's life being dismantled in real time. Cormac watched the digital discourse with detached cynicism, understanding that to most of these people he wasn't quite real, just a character in an ongoing campus drama, his pain and fear abstracted into narrative tension for their consumption. 7:30 p.m. The sun fully set. Campus lights illuminating pathways through pools of yellow brightness, separated by growing shadows. Cormac walked toward the athletic complex, with Marlowe beside him, both silent, tension coiling tighter with each step. They'd agreed she'd stay visible this time. No point hiding when the goal was maximum visibility, maximum documentation, maximum accountability. Behind them, at careful distances, other students followed in small clusters. Marlowe's track teammates, a couple of journalism students with proper cameras, some campus activists who'd been documenting harassment patterns, others drawn by curiosity or boredom or morbid fascination. The athletic complex parking lot sprawled behind the main building, normally busy during day hours, but empty now after Friday evening practice sessions. Just streetlights casting long shadows between parked cars. Brecon waited at the lot's far edge with Cade and Trent, all three of them in workout gear, looking ready for violence. They'd positioned themselves in the darkest section of the lot, away from main lights, chosen their terrain strategically for a fight that wasn't supposed to have witnesses. But Cormac didn't walk toward that dark corner. Instead, he stopped in the center of the lot, under the brightest lights, and waited. Marlowe stood a few feet away, phone already recording. The other witnesses arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, multiple angles of coverage. Impossible to claim afterward that events were unclear or ambiguous. Brecon noticed the audience, stopped his approach, face cycling through surprise and calculation and anger. "What is this, Sullivan? I said just as private conversation." "You said Friday night, parking lot behind the athletic complex." Cormac called back, voice carrying in the cold air. "Didn't say anything about private, and I decided I'd rather have witnesses to whatever happens next." "Smart," Cade muttered, loud enough to hear. "Knows he's about to get his ass kicked. Wants it on video so he can cry to administration afterward. Or knows that documenting everything protects both of us," Cormac countered. "Make sure no one can lie about what actually happens. You should appreciate that, Brecon. Unless you were planning on doing something you'd need to lie about afterward." Brecon's jaw tightened, clearly frustrated, but unable to back down now without looking weak in front of the gathered crowd. He moved closer, leaving the shadows, entering the lit area with visible reluctance. "Fine. You want witnesses? We'll have witnesses. Doesn't change the outcome you showed up. At least there's that. Means you've got some spine after all, even if it's not going to matter in about 5 minutes. I showed up to say something publicly that needs to be said, Cormac replied steadily. I'm not fighting you, Brecken. Not tonight, not ever. Not because I can't, but because I won't give you what you want. What I want is to teach you a lesson about respect. What you want is to prove you're dominant by beating someone up where no one can stop you, but we're not in a dark corner. We're right here, well lit, documented with lots of witnesses who can testify about exactly what happens. So let me make this very clear for the cameras and everyone watching. He raised his voice, addressing not just Brecken, but the assembled audience. I did not agree to fight Brecken Aldrich. I did not consent to any physical confrontation. I'm here specifically to refuse violence as a solution to this situation. If Brecken attacks me anyway, that's assault, and it's being recorded from multiple angles, right? Now, you think you're clever. Brecken stepped within arm's reach, looming, using his size advantage for intimidation. Think bringing your little audience means I won't touch you, but you know what? I don't care about cameras, I don't care about witnesses, and I don't care about consequences because my father's influence means consequences don't stick to me the way they'd stick to you. Maybe, Cormac acknowledged, but here's what I know. I've spent 8 weeks letting you push me around. Letting Cade dump my books, letting Trent photograph me, letting you pour chocolate milk in my backpack, letting all of you treat me like I'm less than human because I refuse to respond with violence. I kept my head down, avoided confrontation, walked away every single time. And you know why? He paused. And in that pause, something shifted in the energy. Everyone suddenly paying closer attention, sensing this moment leading somewhere unexpected. Because 2 years ago, I made a promise to my grandfather as he was dying that I'd never fight again unless I had absolutely no other choice. Because the last time I fought someone, I put them in the hospital for 3 weeks with permanent brain damage, and it almost destroyed my life because I know exactly what my hands can do, and I've spent every day since trying to be someone who doesn't use violence to solve problems, even when violence would be the easy answer. The assembled crowd had gone very quiet. You challenged, I declined. What happens next is entirely on you. The moment stretched, tension building toward breaking point. Around them, the witness crowd watched with rapt attention, phones recording. This confrontation having evolved beyond the simple entertainment they'd anticipated into something more complex, more meaningful. Brecken's eyes moved between Cormac, the cameras, his own lieutenants, calculating odds and outcomes, and Cormac could see the war playing out behind his expression. Pride demanding violence, strategy suggesting this had become too risky, anger pushing toward consequences he might not actually want. Last chance to walk away, Brecken, Cormac said quietly. Last chance to recognize that this path doesn't lead anywhere good for either of us. I don't want to fight you, never wanted to, but if you force it, I will defend myself, and you need to understand, you will lose. And it'll be on camera, and your father's influence won't change the physical reality of you getting beaten publicly and everyone knowing about it. Big talk from Brecken started. But Cormac interrupted, voice hardening. Not talk, reality. You want to know why I've been able to take 8 weeks of your bullshit without breaking? Because I spent 6 years training, fighting, winning. Because I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and an amateur boxing record of 16 wins and 3 losses and more hours on wrestling mats than you've spent in the gym. Because violence is something I'm good at, Brecken, genuinely skilled at. And the only reason you don't know that is because I've worked really hard to hide it. But I'm done hiding, done pretending. You wanted to find out who I really am? This is who I am. Someone who can hurt you very badly and is choosing not to. That's not weakness, that's strength. And if you're too stupid to see the difference, that's your problem, not mine. The declaration hung in the cold air, and Cormac watched it land, saw Brecken's certainty crack and reform and crack again. Cade and Trent had gone very still, clearly reassessing their loyal follower status, suddenly looking less appealing when faced with actual dangerous opponent rather than easy victim around them. The assembled students whispered to each other, this revelation reframing weeks of witnessed harassment, transforming Cormac's submission from cowardice into deliberate restraint, his passivity into active choice. Brecken swallowed, jaw working, pride warring with survival instinct. You're bluffing! Test it and find out. Cormac's stance shifted almost imperceptibly, weight distributing differently, hands hanging loose but ready, and anyone with combat training would recognize the subtle markers of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Hit me, right now on camera, with 30 witnesses. See what happens. See if I'm bluffing. See if you're still the dominant one when you're on your back in 3 seconds with everyone watching. The moment crystallized, balanced on knife's edge, everyone holding their breath, and then Brecken backed up a step. Just one step. Small and almost unconscious, but utterly damning in context. The lead bully flinched away from his chosen victim, broke eye contact, demonstrated submission in front of the exact audience he'd cultivated for months. Whatever happened next, that one backward step had already decided the outcome, shifted the power dynamic irrevocably. This isn't over, Brecken said, but his voice carried less conviction now. The threat weakening into bluster everyone could hear. You think you're clever, showing up with cameras, making speeches, but you still have to exist at Roosevelt State, still have to walk across campus, go to classes, live in this community. And I've got 3 more semesters here. You've got 18 months. That's a long time to make someone miserable. Maybe. Cormac held his ground, not advancing, not retreating, just occupying space with absolute certainty. Or maybe everyone here just watched you back down from someone you've been bullying for 2 months. Maybe they'll share these videos on social media, let the whole campus know that the second you faced actual consequences, you folded. Maybe your reputation takes the hit instead of mine. How do you think that plays out, Brecken? How much power do you have once everyone knows you're just a bully who picks easy targets and runs when they fight back? Another pause, Brecken's face cycling through emotions, rage, humiliation, calculation, fear. Then he turned abruptly, stalked toward the parking lot exit, Cade and Trent following after brief hesitation, all 3 of them retreating from confrontation that had spiraled completely out of their control. The assembled witnesses erupted into conversation, exclamations, commentary, phones still recording their exit, documenting the complete and total reversal of expected power dynamic. Marlowe appeared at Cormac's side, face split by a wide grin. Holy shit, that was... did you see his face when you told him about your fight record? He looked like he was about to piss himself. He wasn't going to actually swing anyway, Cormac said quietly, adrenaline starting to drain, leaving him shaky and exhausted. Not with cameras rolling. He's too smart for that. Knows it would give administration no choice but to act. But yeah, didn't expect him to back up. That was... He trailed off, not quite sure how to process what had just happened. That was you taking all your power back, Marlowe said firmly. That was you refusing to be a victim anymore. That was exactly what needed to happen. The crowd gradually dispersed, students heading back toward dorms and apartments, already posting videos and commentary, the digital narrative of this encounter spreading across campus social media at viral speed. A few people approached Cormac before leaving, nods of respect. In his morning structural analysis lecture, He took his usual back corner seat and felt the familiar prickle of observation. Glancing up, he found several students watching him with undisguised curiosity and heard whispered conversations pause when he made eye contact. Professor Mendoza began her lecture on cantilever beam stress distribution, and gradually attention shifted back to the material, though Cormac remained aware of residual interest throughout the hour. As students filed out after class, two approached his desk. Both juniors he recognized by sight but had never spoken with, engineering majors working on their capstone projects. "Hey man," the first one said, somewhat awkwardly. "Just wanted to say that thing Friday night with Brecon Aldrich was pretty cool. He's been a dick to a lot of people and nobody really stands up to him because of his dad. So, yeah, thanks for that." "Wasn't doing it for anyone else," Cormac replied honestly. "But you're welcome, I guess." Still, made a lot of people feel like maybe we don't have to just accept his shit forever. The second student shifted his weight. "Anyway, if you want to join our study group for Mendoza's class, you'd be welcome. We meet Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the library." Cormac studied them, trying to determine if this was genuine or some new variety of social maneuvering. Their expressions seemed sincere, though, and he found himself nodding slowly. "Maybe. I'll think about it." They left, and Cormac gathered his materials, exited Harrington Hall into the quad. The morning had warmed slightly, frost melting in patches, November sun bright if not warm. Students moved across the grass and pathways in their usual patterns, and Cormac navigated through the crowd with the same careful awareness that had become automatic, always tracking potential threats, always mapping exit routes, always ready for the confrontation that might arrive without warning. But it didn't arrive. Not that morning, not that afternoon between classes, not during his evening physics lecture. He saw Brecon twice from a distance, once in the student union cafeteria, once crossing the quad, and both times their eyes met briefly before Brecon looked away first, changing his trajectory to avoid close proximity. Cade and Trent were nowhere visible, and the systematic campaign of harassment that had defined weeks of Cormac's life seemed to have simply stopped. Tuesday followed the same pattern, then Wednesday. The acute hypervigilance gradually eased toward chronic wariness, adrenaline spikes becoming less frequent, if never entirely absent. Marlowe met him for breakfast both mornings, their friendship solidifying into something genuine and comfortable, no longer bound primarily by shared experience of harassment, but by actual mutual interest and compatibility. She introduced him to her track teammates, a cluster of students who'd witnessed Friday night's confrontation and apparently approved of his handling of it. And Cormac found himself unexpectedly folded into a small social circle for the first time since arriving at Roosevelt State. "You look different," Marlowe observed Thursday morning over coffee. "Less like you're expecting to get hit any second." "Still expecting it," Cormac admitted, "just less certain about when. Feels temporary." "Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe you actually solved the problem." She sipped her latte thoughtfully. "Bullies mostly operate on perceived power differential. Once you demonstrate you're not actually helpless, and especially once you do it publicly where everyone can see, the cost-benefit calculus changes. Continuing to target you stops being easy entertainment and starts being active risk to their own status. Or they wait until attention dies down and come back harder." "Possible. But I've been watching Brecon's social media. He's getting roasted in comments, losing followers. His usual crew seems less enthusiastic about posting with him. Friday night hurt his reputation more than he expected. I think he's going to cut his losses, find easier targets, try to rebuild his image." Cormac wanted to believe it, but years of experience suggested permanent resolution was rarely that simple. Still, the practical reality was that he couldn't maintain maximum alertness indefinitely, couldn't live in constant fight-or-flight state without burning out completely. Eventually, he'd have to choose between trusting that the situation had stabilized or transferring again, starting over somewhere else, repeating this cycle until he ran out of schools or broke completely. That evening, walking back to his apartment after his last class, lost in these circular thoughts, he nearly collided with someone coming around a corner from the opposite direction. Both stopped short, and Cormac found himself facing Brecon Aldrich on an empty sidewalk 3 blocks from campus. No witnesses, no cameras, no protection beyond his own capabilities. They stood in tense silence for several seconds, sizing each other up, the entire history of their conflict compressed into this unexpected moment. Brecon looked different, smaller somehow, less certain, the easy confidence that had characterized all their previous interactions notably absent. Up close, Cormac could see the physical signs of stress, slight shadows under his eyes, jaw tight, shoulders carrying tension that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Sullivan?" Brecon said finally, voice lacking its usual mocking edge. I'm not here to start anything, just heading home." "Okay." Cormac waited, not moving, not yielding space, but not claiming it either. "Look." Brecon shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to just let me say it. Friday night was fucked up. This whole semester's been fucked up. I've been thinking about it and—" He stopped, jaw working, forcing words that clearly didn't come easy. "I'm sorry for the harassment, for making your life hell, for everything. It was shitty behavior and you didn't deserve it." Cormac stared at him, genuinely shocked. Whatever responses he'd prepared for this moment, threats, posturing, physical confrontation, an actual apology hadn't made the list. Why? Why apologize? Because I've spent the last few days watching myself get destroyed on social media and realizing I don't like who I've become. Brecon's laugh was bitter, self-directed. Turns out when you build your entire identity around being dominant and intimidating, having someone publicly demonstrate you're neither of those things forces some uncomfortable self-reflection. Plus, my dad called. Someone sent him the videos from Friday. He was less than impressed, threatened to cut off my tuition funding if I cause any more incidents that make him look bad. So you're apologizing because you got caught and there are consequences, not because you actually feel bad about what you did to me. That's... Brecon started to object, then stopped, seemed to really consider the accusation. Maybe partially. I'm not going to pretend I'm suddenly enlightened or transformed, but also, yeah, watching those videos, seeing how I acted for months, hearing other people call me out, it made me see that I've been the villain in a lot of people's stories, and I don't want to be that guy anymore. Don't want to be my father's son, using power and influence to hurt people because I can. So I'm apologizing, and I'm backing off. You won't have problems from me going forward. And your friends, Cade and Trent? Already talked to them. They follow my lead. So if I'm leaving you alone, they will too. Brecon met Cormac's eyes directly for the first time in this conversation. For what it's worth, I'm impressed you held back as long as you did. Knowing what I know now about your background, realizing you could have hospitalized me any time in the past 2 months, but chose not to. That takes real discipline, real strength. More than I've got, honestly. Cormac absorbed this, trying to determine sincerity from strategic performance. Brecon's body language suggested genuine discomfort, genuine vulnerability, but years of experience made him skeptical of sudden transformations. People rarely changed their fundamental nature just from social embarrassment and parental pressure. But then again, His grandfather had always insisted that everyone deserved a chance to prove they could be better than their worst moments, that growth was always possible for those who chose it. "I don't forgive you," Cormac said carefully. "Maybe someday, but not now. It's too recent, caused too much damage, but I accept your apology, and I'm willing to move forward without continued hostility if you genuinely back off." "Fair," Brecken nodded slowly. "More than fair, actually. And I meant what I said. You won't have problems from me. We're done." They stood for another moment, and then Brecken moved past him, continuing down the sidewalk toward whatever destination he'd been heading. Cormac watched him go, this person who'd dominated his consciousness for weeks, who'd systematically tried to break him, now just another student walking home in the November cold, diminished and almost pathetic in his defeat. The weeks that followed brought gradual normalization. Roosevelt State's social ecosystem rebalancing itself around new information and recalibrated hierarchies. Brecken kept his word, maintaining obvious distance, and his lieutenants followed suit. The three of them losing their tight-pack cohesion as other students sensed vulnerability and began either avoiding them or challenging minor assertions of dominance they'd previously accepted. Cormac watched this unfold with detached interest, understanding he'd fundamentally disrupted an established pattern that ripples from Friday night's confrontation spread far beyond his personal situation. His friendship with Marlowe deepened into something resembling actual relationship, not officially defined, neither pushing for labels or commitments, but spending significant time together, sharing meals and study sessions and conversations that ranged from tactical to philosophical to comfortably mundane. Her track teammates became his peripheral social circle. Cormac stayed in his apartment, using the quiet week for deep focus on year-end projects and catching up on sleep deficit accumulated over months of stress. Marlowe also stayed, her family situation complicated by recent divorce, making home less appealing than peaceful solitude, and they spent Thanksgiving together in his small apartment, cooking an approximation of traditional meal, watching football on his laptop, talking about futures and plans and dreams in the way people do when guard drops and genuine intimacy becomes possible. "You ever think about going back to fighting?" she asked at some point, both of them full of turkey and drowsy from tryptophan, sprawled on his couch in comfortable proximity, like amateur competition, not professional or anything crazy, just for yourself. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss it. Miss the clarity, the definable success or failure, the pure honesty of competition, but I promised my grandfather, and breaking that promise feels like betraying him." "Did you, though? Break it? I mean, you never actually fought Brecken. You defended yourself verbally, used threat of violence as deterrent, but you didn't hit anyone. That seems like it honors the spirit of what your grandfather wanted, using your skills to protect rather than harm." Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finding loopholes in a promise that was supposed to be absolute. Or maybe your grandfather would be proud that you figured out how to be strong without being violent. That you can win confrontations through discipline and restraint instead of just being the best fighter. She shifted to look at him directly. "You changed this campus, Cormac, not by beating anyone up, but by refusing to be a victim and showing other people they could do the same. That's exactly the kind of strength he wanted you to develop." Cormac considered this, wanting to believe it, uncertainty still lodged in his chest like ice. But Marlowe's words resonated with something his grandfather had said during their last coherent conversation, something Cormac had almost forgotten in the weight of the final promise. "Being strong isn't about how hard you can hit, boy. It's about how much you can absorb and still stay standing, still stay kind, still choose better than violence when violence would be easier." Early December brought finals preparation, campus tension rising as students crammed for exams and worked frantically on semester projects. Cormac's structural analysis final project, designing a pedestrian bridge for a hypothetical river crossing, complete with load calculations, material specifications, and stress analysis, consumed his evenings, the kind of intensive technical work that fully occupied his mind and gave satisfaction in its systematic progression toward completion. He worked often in the library now, no longer afraid of being targeted, his corner study room becoming his dedicated project space. 3 weeks before semester's end, he encountered Brecken one more time in the student union, both reaching for coffee at the same Starbucks counter, proximity impossible to avoid. They made brief eye contact, tension flickering between them. Then Brecken nodded, small, respectful acknowledgement, and Cormac returned it. No words exchanged, no dramatic reconciliation, just mutual recognition that their conflict had reached sustainable resolution, that they could exist in the same space without violence or hostility, that the page had turned, even if the chapter wasn't entirely closed. Finals week arrived with its characteristic chaos and exhaustion, students sleeping in libraries, subsisting on caffeine and stress. The entire campus compressed into final push towards semester completion. Cormac's exams went well. Structural analysis theoretical section showing his deep understanding of beam mechanics and load distribution, material science practical problems, leveraging his ability to quickly analyze failure modes, physics computational section benefiting from solid mathematical foundation. His final project presentation earned strong marks from Professor Mendoza, who commented that his work showed exceptional attention to realistic constraints and practical implementation concerns. The semester ended on a Friday afternoon in mid-December, campus erupting into relief and celebration as students finished their final obligations, packed their belongings, prepared to scatter toward home and holidays. Marlowe caught an evening bus back to Cleveland, promising to stay in touch over break. Relationship still undefined, but clearly continuing. Cormac's engineering study group exchanged contact information, making vague plans for next semester coordination. The casual friendship of academic convenience deepening into something that might persist beyond graduation. Alone in his apartment that final evening, Cormac sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulled up a document he'd started weeks ago but never finished, titled simply, "Letter to Papa." It was his attempt to work through the semester's events, to process whether he'd honored his grandfather's memory or betrayed it, to understand what he'd learned about strength and violence and the complicated space between them. He wrote for hours, sentences flowing more easily now that the immediate stress had passed, reflecting on the journey from invisible victim to unexpected victor, examining the choices he'd made and their consequences, acknowledging both the growth he'd experienced and the guilt that still haunted him about threatening violence even in self-defense. The letter became something like confession, therapy, commitment to continuing his grandfather's lessons, even while recognizing that absolute pacifism wasn't sustainable or even ethical in face of genuine cruelty. Near the end, he wrote, "You made me promise to walk away, and I did walk away for months from every provocation and humiliation. Having discovered that true strength sometimes meant absorbing pain without retaliation, choosing restraint over revenge, showing mercy when violence would have been easier and more immediately satisfying." His grandfather had been right about one thing, he realized. Violence was easy, discipline was hard, walking away took more courage than fighting in most circumstances. And the deepest, most difficult strength came from being capable of harm and choosing gentleness instead, from having the power to destroy and selecting to build, from winning without needing to see your opponent broken and defeated. That lesson, the one his grandfather had spent his final days trying to impart, had finally taken root, not through the promise extracted in a hospital room, but through the lived experience of testing that promise against reality, discovering its limits and possibilities, learning that principles were meant to guide rather than constrain, to elevate rather than restrict. Cormac stood, stretched muscles still carrying tension from the semester's accumulated stress, moved to his window and looked out at Roosevelt State's winter landscape. Campus lights glowed against the darkness, illuminating paths between buildings, creating pools of safety in the surrounding night. Students moved between these lights, heading toward parking lots and bus stops, leaving for break, eager for home and family and temporary escape from academic pressure. He thought about next semester, about returning to campus no longer as invisible victim or reluctant warrior, but as someone who'd proven himself capable of both submission and strength, who understood the difference between them, who'd earned his place in this community through the hardest possible path. Thought about Marlowe, their developing relationship, the unexpected gift of genuine connection he hadn't known he needed. Thought about his engineering studies, the satisfying progression toward competence and eventual career, building bridges and structures that would help people rather than hurting them. The future spread ahead, uncertain but no longer quite so frightening. And Cormac Sullivan allowed himself to smile at his own reflection in the dark window, recognizing the face looking back, older than 3 months ago, harder in some ways but also more fully human, carrying scars but not defeated by them, having discovered that survival wasn't victory, but surviving while remaining fundamentally yourself. That was something worth being proud of. His phone buzzed. Text from Marlowe. Made it to Cleveland, already missing campus. Stay safe over break. See you in January. He typed back, you too. And Marlowe, thanks for everything. Anytime, fighter boy. We've got each other's backs now. Yeah, we do. He set his phone down, returned to his view of campus, and felt the weight of the semester finally lifting from his shoulders. Tomorrow he'd start packing, prepare for his own trip home to Detroit, visit his grandfather's grave for the first time since the transfer, tell the old man about what had happened, about the promise kept and bent, and ultimately honored in ways neither of them could have anticipated. But tonight, he just stood at his window and let himself breathe, let himself be present in this moment of hard-won peace, let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way to be both strong and kind, both capable and restrained, both his grandfather's legacy and his own person. The journey wasn't over, wouldn't be over for a long time, might never really be complete. But he'd taken the hardest steps, proven to himself that he could withstand pressure without breaking, could choose dignity over dominance, could be more than his worst impulses and better than the circumstances trying to define him. And in the end, perhaps that was what his grandfather had really wanted all along. Not the absence of violence, but the presence of choice. Not the elimination of strength, but the discipline to use it wisely. Not the retreat from conflict, but the wisdom to recognize when fighting was necessary and when mercy was the stronger response. Cormac Sullivan, engineering student, former fighter, survivor of systematic harassment, had learned these lessons the hard way. But he'd learned them. And moving forward, he'd carry that knowledge like armor, like wisdom, like the foundation upon which to build everything that came next. The semester was over. A new chapter waited, and for the first time since arriving at Roosevelt State University, Cormac felt ready to face it.